They thought she was just another easy target, a routine setup, another innocent person caught in their web of corruption. But what these crooked cops didn't know, the woman they framed wasn't just anyone, she was a DEA agent. And now the game has changed. It all started with a traffic stop, one that should have been quick and uneventful. But from the moment they pulled her over, something felt off. The officers were too eager, too forceful. Then, out of nowhere, they found drugs in her car. Drugs she had never seen before in her life. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a setup. Instead of panicking, she played along. Let them think they had her. Let them drag her to court like she was just another victim. But as she walked into that courtroom, their smug faces still confident, she knew they were in for the shock of their lives. Because today wasn't the day she went down. Today was the day their whole operation unraveled. What happens when the ones who think they have all the power realize they've made the biggest mistake of their lives? Stay tuned. As she stepped into the courtroom, the officers exchanged glances, their confidence unshaken. To them, this was just another day, another arrest, another person they had complete control over. They didn't know the truth yet, but she did, and that was enough to keep her steady. She glanced at the prosecutor, who barely looked up from his notes. It was clear, this was routine, a system that ran smoothly, fueled by lies and abuse of power. The judge entered, and the courtroom settled. Her name was called. She took a deep breath, stepping forward. The officers stood nearby, their expressions smug. The lead officer, the one who planted the drugs, adjusted his tie and stepped up to testify. He spoke with confidence, detailing the discovery of narcotics in her vehicle. His words were smooth, practiced. He had done this before. He knew exactly how to spin the story. She kept her face unreadable, but inside, her mind was racing. Every word he spoke was another piece of the puzzle. As he continued, she couldn't help but wonder, how many others had been caught in their trap? How many innocent lives had been destroyed because of men like him? She had seen corruption before, but this was something deeper, more organized. She felt the weight of her badge inside her pocket. It was still there, hidden from view. The moment wasn't right yet. Not yet. She needed to let them dig their own grave first. Then came her turn to speak. The defense attorney stood beside her, asking the standard questions. Name, occupation. She could feel the officers watching her closely, waiting for her to slip up, to show fear. But she didn't. Instead, she let the moment hang in the air, just long enough for doubt to creep in. And then she spoke. Her words were calm, steady. But they carried something the officers hadn't expected: power. The room shifted, and for the first time the officers felt it. Something was wrong. The courtroom felt different now. The shift was subtle, but it was there, the way the prosecutor glanced up for the first time, the way the officers shifted in their seats. They couldn't put their finger on it, but something wasn't adding up. She kept her voice steady as she answered each question. She didn't lie, but she didn't reveal too much either. She let them think they were still in control, that they were the ones deciding how this would play out. But every word she spoke was a thread, slowly unraveling their carefully crafted lie. The lead officer clenched his jaw, his confidence wavering. He knew something wasn't right. She could see it in his eyes. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, the way she didn't beg or panic like the others they had framed. Maybe it was the way she looked straight at him, like she knew everything. Then the prosecutor asked a simple question. What do you do for a living? A pause, just long enough for tension to fill the room. The officers watched closely, waiting for the answer. She met the prosecutor's eyes, then looked directly at the lead officer before speaking. I work in federal law enforcement. The words landed like a hammer. The lead officer flinched, just for a second, but she saw it. The others didn't react right away, but she could feel their unease growing. The prosecutor straightened in his chair, suddenly much more interested in her testimony. She could sense their minds racing. Which agency? How much did she know? How deep did this go? But she didn't give them the satisfaction of answering. She let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit with their own fear. The judge cleared his throat. Which agency exactly? Another pause. She could hear her own heartbeat, and then finally she spoke. I'm a DEA agent. The courtroom went still. The officers' faces drained of color. And that's when the real panic began. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. The officers, who had been so smug just moments ago, now sat frozen, their expressions shifting from confusion to something darker, fear. The lead officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His mind was working overtime, searching for a way out. Maybe she was bluffing. Maybe she was just saying it to scare them. But deep down he knew. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't lying. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, suddenly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and forced a polite smile. A DEA agent, he repeated, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. She didn't blink. That's right. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge glanced between her and the officers, his expression unreadable, but there was a weight in his gaze now. He had presided over countless cases, but something about this one was different. The lead officer shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He was losing control, and he knew it. If she was DEA, then this wasn't just another easy conviction. This was a disaster. The prosecutor hesitated before speaking again. And you were arrested with drugs in your vehicle. She let the question hang for a second before answering. Planted drugs. The murmur grew louder. The judge tapped his gavel once, signaling for quiet, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. The lead officer's partner leaned in and whispered something to him. She noticed the way his jaw clenched, the way his fingers twitched. They were trying to figure out an exit strategy, but there wasn't one. She turned her gaze back to the prosecutor. I assume the body cam footage has already been reviewed. The lead officer stiffened. And that's when she knew he was out of moves. The lead officer's face tightened, his grip on the table turning his knuckles white. He knew he had a problem, a big one. And now, everyone in the room could see it. The prosecutor glanced toward the officers, clearly expecting them to confirm the existence of body cam footage. But no one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and damning. She let the moment linger before tilting her head slightly. What's wrong? Shouldn't be a problem if everything was by the book. The officer's partner shifted uncomfortably. The pressure was building. The courtroom wasn't just watching anymore. They were waiting. The lead officer finally spoke, his voice lower than before. There was a technical issue with the footage. The excuse landed like a weak punch. Too soft, too obvious. The prosecutor blinked, processing the words. A technical issue, he repeated. His tone was polite, but the doubt was clear. She folded her arms, keeping her expression unreadable. That's interesting, because before I was taken into custody, I sent a message to my team. The officer's breath hitched, but he recovered quickly. Your team, she nodded, slow and deliberate. That's right. I let them know exactly where I was. Who stopped me? What was happening? She let the words sink in before adding. And I also made sure they pulled all traffic cam footage from that intersection. A sharp inhale came from someone in the gallery. The officer's face darkened, his mask of control slipping. His partner looked like he wanted to disappear. Now the prosecutor was no longer just interested, he was concerned. He straightened his papers, choosing his words carefully. And I assume this footage is in the hands of the DEA. She gave the smallest of smiles. As we speak. The officer's jaw clenched, his mind racing. He had thought he was running the game, but now he was starting to realize he was the one being played. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in on the officers who had once held all the power. The lead officer's confidence had cracked, his breathing uneven as he tried to find a way out. His partner sat stiffly beside him, avoiding eye contact with anyone. They both knew the truth was no longer something they could control. The prosecutor exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Well, it seems we have a serious issue here. His tone was different now, less like a man doing his job, more like someone realizing he'd been used. He turned to the officers, his eyes narrowing. I assume you'd like to explain why DEA surveillance is telling a very different story than your report. The lead officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was cornered. His usual tricks, intimidation, fabrication, manipulation, none of them worked here. Because this time, they had arrested the wrong woman. Before he could force out a response, the courtroom doors swung open. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, walking with purpose. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Her team had arrived. The agent strode up to the prosecutor, handing him a file. He flipped it open, his expression hardening as he scanned the pages. Then, slowly, he turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to request an immediate dismissal of all charges. The judge gave a slow nod. Granted. The gavel hit the desk. Just like that, the case was over. But for the officers, the nightmare was just beginning. The lead officer sat frozen, his mind scrambling for a way out. But there wasn't one. The agent in the suit turned to him. Detective, you are coming with us. His partner tensed. For what? The agent didn't blink. Obstruction, evidence tampering, and that's just the beginning. The lead officer's face went pale. And that's when she spoke, her voice calm, almost amused. You really should have checked who you were messing with. The lead officer sat frozen, his mind still racing, but there was nowhere left to run. His partner avoided looking at him, as if already distancing himself from the fallout. The courtroom, once under their control, now belonged to the truth. She stood, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. It wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about every person who had been framed before her, the ones who never got this chance. This wasn't just justice for herself, it was justice for them too. The agent in the suit stepped forward. You'll both be placed under investigation immediately. I'd suggest you think carefully before speaking. The lead officer finally found his voice, but it was weak now, stripped of the confidence he had walked in with. This is a mistake. She raised an eyebrow. That's what I said when you arrested me. Didn't seem to matter then. His mouth opened, then shut. He had no argument left. The agents led them away, their heads low, their careers crumbling with each step.